Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to Passage to India, sections 6 and 7, one of the more intriguing sections of this amazing poem. Now, there is an argument that's often voiced that Americans think that they're somehow better than everyone else in the world, and Whitman is sometimes given responsibility for this. But as we're going to see in our study of Passage to India, it isn't that Whitman argues that America is better than the other countries of the world, but rather it is a culmination of all the other countries in the world. In other words, his reading of history is that everything that came before came to produce this amazing country of creators, inventors, that is to say, artists. And so when we heard about him speaking about the true Son of God as being the poet, that poet will be then representational of a certain kind of mindset that for Whitman will be American. Now, as we get into this, we'll see more of what we're speaking of. The assumption is that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist, and that you have as well engaged in all of the previous lectures, including our introductory comments for Passage to India. I'm hopeful that you have seen that, and that as well that you've been with us for the first 5 sections, because that will be necessary for our study here. Now, as we turn to Passage 6, the longer of the passages in Passage to India, and then get ready for the little brief Passage 7. We'll begin with the word year. Now, we're going to see Whitman's celebration of Christopher Columbus in this section, and that will right away be troubling for us. And why Whitman had the view of Columbus as being an amazing hero, very pious, and all of that, we'll talk about here at 3:8 in a little bit. But notice, year at whose wide flung door I sing. Do you remember at the very beginning when we started together, the poem, Shut Not Your Doors? Do you remember this? Shut not your doors to me, proud libraries, for that which was lacking on all your well-filled shelves, yet needed most I bring. Forth from the war emerging a book I've made, the words of my book nothing, the drift of it everything, a book separate, not linked with the rest, nor felt by the intellect. But you, ye untold latencies, will thrill to every page. This idea of the door and pushing the door open is going to be central. Year of the purpose accomplished. Again, go back to the idea of it is finished when Christ on the cross in John 19:28-30 will say what he says. This idea, the culmination. Year of the marriage of continents, climates, and oceans. By the way, notice the 3. Now, this idea of marriage we're going to get to in a little bit with brides and bridegrooms. The idea of coming together in harmony and all of that. Now, we have a parenthetic and the phrase, no mere Doge of Venice now wedding the Adriatic. Our Nortons will tell us that at the pinnacle of the power of Venice, the Doge annually performed a ceremonial wedding of the city to the sea by throwing a ring into the Adriatic, and this is what he's referencing there. And then he comes back to the year. Oh, he says, I see, O year, in you, the vast terraquos globe, given and giving all. Terraquos only used one time in all Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. Europe to Asia, Africa joined, and they to the New World. You'll remember this phrase, New World, from to foreign lands. The lands, geographies, dancing before you. It's an interesting verb. Holding a festival garland as brides and bridegrooms, hand in hand. Now, I think it's significant that hand in hand is used here in the way that it's used, because, of course, it takes us to those final lines of Milton's Paradise Lost, a set of lines that we have commented on already a number of times in Leaves of Grass. You'll remember, of course, that we were mentioning the idea of Adam and Eve earlier in this poem. Now, we got Passage to India used for the last time. Before it was used as the first line, and that was the last time it was used that way. Now, Passage to India one last time. Cooling airs from Caracas far, soothing cradle of man. This is obviously the whole notion of India. The river Euphrates flowing, the past lit up again. Our Nortons will remind us that Euphrates, the valley of the Euphrates, is traditionally the cradle of Western civilization, hypothetically associated, of course, with Noah's flood as well. Lo, soul, the retrospect brought forward, the old, most populous, wealthy of earth's lands, the streams of the Indus and the Ganges, obviously back to India, and their many affluents, and then in parenthetics, I, my shores of America walking today, behold, resuming all. And this takes us to the comment that I was just making about Whitman's view of America. You'll remember that he uses the word America in part 4, 92 times in Leaves of Grass, America or Americans or some variant is used. The idea is resuming all. In other words, all of history can be read as pointing towards the culmination that will then be America. And then interestingly, he jumps back to Alexander the Great. And our Nortons will remind us that Alexander the Great died on his return journey from an invasion of India in 323 BC. And the way he says it is this: the tale of Alexander on his warlike marches suddenly dying. On one side China, on the other side Persia and Arabia. To the south the great seas and the Bay of Bengal. The flowing literatures, here we think of obviously the Upanishadic tradition as well as the Bhagavad Gita, as we commented on as it relates to this poem. Tremendous epics, religions, castes, old occult Brahma. Of course, we know that Emerson was very influenced by Brahma, and of course one of his important poems as well as comments in his essays. Interminably far back, the tender and junior Buddha, one other time mentioned in Song of Myself 41. Central and southern empires and all their belongings, possessors, the wars, and we'll pause here for just a moment, for Norton's. 300 years apart in time, Tamerlane from 1336 maybe to 1405, Prince of Destruction, led wars of conquest in Turkey, Persia, India, Russia, and Aurungzebe in 1618 to 1703, Emperor of Hindustan and self-styled conqueror of the world, to some extent made good this boast in neighboring Mohammedan and Indian principalities. And of course, when we meet Marco Polo, we're going to be talking about Batuta as well. Marco Polo of 1254 to 1324, the Venetian traveler, of course, penetrated into far Cathay, and Batutua of 1303 to 1377, a traveler in Africa and Asia, were agents of mercantile expansion, and that's going to be the focus here now going forward. Notice the wars of Tamerlane, the reign of Aurungzebe, the traders, rulers, explorers, we're going to make a note of that one, explorers, Muslims, Venetians, Byzantium, the Arabs, Portuguese, the first travelers famous yet, Marco Polo, Batuta, the Moor, again, all traveling, but traveling for what purpose? Mercantile purposes. Doubts to be solved, the map incognita, blanks to be filled, the foot of man unstayed, the hands never at rest, thyself, O soul, that will not brook a challenge. By the way, brook is used only one time in this way as a verb in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. In other words, what's he celebrating? Well, from Alexander to Marco Polo, celebrating individuals that are explorers, individuals that go out. We think, of course, of Daniel Bernstein's classic, The Discoverers, as well, when we read these kinds of lines. And then he continues, the medieval navigators rise before me, the world of 1492. And it's almost as if now, with the word year, and now, not 1492, we're going to get now to our celebration of Columbus. The world of 1492 with its awakened enterprise. We're back, of course, to mercantilism. Something swelling in humanity now, like the sap of the earth in spring. The sunset splendor of chivalry declining. By the way, hear all those S sounds again? Something swelling in humanity now, like the sap of the earth. By the way, you remember sap gets used in Song of Myself 24. It gets used sexually in Spontaneous Me. Of the earth in spring, the sunset splendor of chivalry declining. It's the only time the word chivalry gets used in all Leaves of Grass. Of course, the idea that chivalry declines as more other technologies will advance. And then, now, he turns to Columbus, and we'll have our Columbus tribute. Now, we're going to point out that there are two places where Whitman scholars believe probably gained his knowledge of Columbus. The first is a poem, Joel Barlow's The Columbiad from 1807, which is this philosophical epic poem that will celebrate Columbus as a prophet. And then Washington Irving's classic, The Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus, 1828, that multi-volume set. It is from there that Whitman believed and learned that Columbus was what he will call pious. Look at what he says about him. And who art thou, sad shade, gigantic, visionary, thyself a visionary, with majestic limbs and pious beaming eyes, spreading around with every look of thine a golden world enhuing it with gorgeous hues. By the way, let's just point out the irony. He will reference Columbus as pious. It's awfully hard to think of Columbus as pious, knowing what we know today, of course, of the horrors of what Columbus and his folk enacted. It's interesting that he uses the word golden world, because many will point out, well, yeah, it was gold that in the end Columbus was probably really looking for more than anything else. The word inhuing gets used one time in All Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. I find that fascinating. And then we're back to gorgeous hues again. And then he comments some more on Columbus. As the chief histrion, that is to say an actor or performer, down to the floodlights walks in some great scena, dominating the rest, I see the admiral himself. Now, Norton's wants to let us know that here Columbus is this admiral of the ocean sea, the chief histrion, the actor, and the world of 1492. All of this comes back to us again when we study the poem that is to follow. And when he mentions his Palos here, he's talking about the Spanish seaport from which Columbus sailed on August 3rd, 1492. Regarding the misfortunes of his last years, Whitman's Prayer of Columbus, the poem to follow, will be the one in which we will perceive an autobiographical overtone, and we're setting ourselves up for the study of the poem that is to come. As the chief histrion, down to the floodlights walks in some great scena, dominating the rest I see the admiral itself, and then in parenthetics, history's type of courage, action, faith. Notice the three. Behold him sail from Palos, leading his little fleet. His voyage, behold, his return, his great fame, his misfortunes, calumniators. Behold him a prisoner, chained. Behold his dejection, poverty, death. Again, the three. We'll comment on the way in which, as Whitman grew old, he began to identify with Columbus and for reasons that we'll have to talk about. And then in parenthetics, curious in time. Again, his use of the word curious is so important in Leaves of Grass. I stand, noting the efforts of heroes. That takes us back to Song of Myself 18, all overcome heroes. Is the deferment long? Bitter the slander, poverty, death. Lies the sea, think about Leaves of Grass, unwrecked for centuries in the ground. Lo, to God's due occasion, uprising. I told you about this word in this poem. In the night, it sprouts, blooms, again, Leaves of Grass, and fills the earth with use and beauty. In other words, what Columbus planted is now coming to its full fruition. Now to passage 7. A brief passage that will be easily read with passage 6. Passage indeed, O soul, to primal thought. Again, this idea of the seeds, primal. You'll remember this word from starting from Pomonok 17, a world primal. Not lands and seas alone, thine own clear freshness. Remember his use of the word freshness in Song of the Open Road, passage 8. The young maturity of brood and bloom to realms of budding Bibles. It's interesting, all these B sounds. And of course, this idea of budding, it only gets used one time in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. It's interesting, given Leaves of Grass is our name of our poems, to realms of budding Bibles. In other words, all of the religious texts that came before all point towards America. This idea of course, the city on a hill, as we've commented on it in other lectures in our study of American thought, is central. O soul, repressless, only use in all Leaves of Grass is right here. I with thee and thou with me, thy circumnavigation of the world. Circumnavigation used only one time in Leaves of Grass, and it's here. Of the world begin. Remember back in passage 5 he says the time's arrived? In other words, there's a sense of urgency that we're about to pick up with in passage 8 when he says, oh, we can wait no longer. Of man, the voyage of his mind's return to reason's early paradise. We're back to Eden and of course Milton in Paradise Lost along with Genesis 3. Back to wisdom's birth. Again, this is that idea of India. To innocent intuitions, again, with fair creation. Fair here meaning not just balanced but beautiful. So what are we going to make of these two passages together? Well, I think his argument is that the most important journey is the odyssey of the mind. That is to say, all odysseys that are physical grow out of some kind of spiritual or intellectual odyssey. At 2b, I love the word choice. Notice budding Bibles. What an interesting phrase. At 3a, I've commented already on where Whitman got his views of Columbus. And we will comment as well more on this when we meet Prayer of Columbus in the next poem. Finally, at 3b, what are your views of Columbus? Do you consider him pious, for example? And how do you balance the fact that Columbus did what he did, and yet this amazing country, this amazing nation, will somehow be a product of some of those actions. Of course, we can ask it this way as well. What are your favorite budding Bibles? That is to say, the texts that lead to the greatest growth in your life. And I'm hopeful that Leaves of Grass will be that. Let's finish with sections 8, 9, and the amazing invitation to travel passage. Thank you.